Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our talks with Walt. And we turn now in the deathbed edition to the poem starting from Paumanok, that amazing poem that's broken up into 19 sections. We're now at section number 9. We've just finished section number 8. My assumption is that at learnstrong.net you'll find our previous lectures, the 24 of the inscriptions lectures, and then for sure the previous 8 lectures of starting from Paumanok. I would say especially lecture number 8, because we're going to turn now to a continuation. In some ways, again, we said reading starting from Paumanok is a great way to start to prepare to read Song of Myself. In some ways, we're going to see the way that sometimes Whitman, as he will compile the sections of starting from Paumanok, just like he'll do in, for example, Song of Myself, some of those sections stand completely alone and can be a poem unto themselves. Others of those sections clearly go together, as do the 2 sections 8 and 9, which obviously begs the question, why break it up? Like, why not just have 1:8 that goes all the way, to the final lines of section 9 provides for all? I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. I think he's trying to focus on different elements, but here in 8-9, we're definitely looking at Whitman as pedagogue, as instructor, as teacher. Now, before we begin, we're going to see this great word, camarero. And it's one of the favorite words of Walt Whitman in Leaves of Grass. It is his word for comrade, which is his other word that he loves to use. It's used in Leaves of Grass. Camarero is used 7 times, beginning with Song of Myself, is neither the present French camaraderie nor the French camarade, but as Louise Pound noted in Walt Whitman and the French Language from American Speech in May of 1926, it's an Old English, she says, quote, an Old English form of the Spanish word which he had from the Waverley novels as he played the game. That is to say, this will be, and of course it will become famous at the end of Song of the Open Road, and when we get to Song of the Open Road, we'll remind ourselves that we made a comment about this one. Let's just now continue with passage 9. Remember at the beginning of 8, it was, what are you doing, young man? Now at the beginning of 9, it is, what do you seek, so pensive and silent? What do you need, camarero? Dear son, do you think it is love? Listen, dear son. Listen, America, daughter or son. It is a painful thing to love a man or woman to excess, and yet it satisfies, it is great. But there is something else very great. It makes the whole coincide. It, magnificent, beyond materials, with continuous hands, sweeps and provides for all. And notice this word all is the omnes word from passage 7, that Latin plural of all, meaning not just plural all, but the all. That is to say, essential, foundational. So here we are, back to the same question of passage 8. What is it that's essential? And here, obviously, we're working again with Thoreau's Walt, and I went to the woods because I wish to live deliberately to front only the essential facts. That is to say, what is most necessary, because he says it. I didn't want to come to the end and discover that I had not lived. Living is too dear, he says, right? So here, notice if the first question in passage 8 is, what are you doing, right? The first question in passage 9 is, what do you seek? And then the word pensive here, serious, right? Silent, right? That is to say, obviously I can tell that you're serious about whatever it is that you're doing. What do you need? Now notice we go from doing to seek to need. So we got 3 of these kind of questions, and then of course he uses this famous camarero. Camarero is a way for him to reach out through the pages of Leaves of Grass and to put his arm around you and to say what he will say elsewhere. How do I feel in your hands? Which is a remarkable thing to ask, and then you realize, oh yeah, I'm reading a volume that I'm marking up, I'm annotating, I'm trying to work with it at multiple levels, I'm trying to own this text, and in some ways I'm trying to befriend Whitman, or I'm allowing Whitman, or the voice of Whitman, Whitman as teacher, Whitman as pedagogue, to challenge me. Now, much of 8-9 of Starting from Paumanok will come to its full fruition in passage 36-37 of Song of Myself. So put that in your notes at 3a. When we come there, we will, that's the famous destroy the teacher passage. When we come there, we will meet this voice one more time of, hey, are you okay? I mean, I see you're pretty serious about all of this, but do you actually understand what it is you need? What it is that you seek? What it is that you're doing? Notice he says it, finally, dear son, and he's going to use this twice. Whitman is father. We saw this in our study of the inscriptions poems, right? Dear son, he says, do you think it is love? Now, that's a fascinating question. In the end, is it love that you want? Earlier it was amoris from passage 8. What is it that you ultimately really, really need? And we pointed out in our lectures at learnstrong.net when we did all of the different chapters of Walden, how rarely Thoreau uses the word love. When he uses that word, it is an important word in the same way I would say here. But notice it comes in the form of kind of an epistemological fallibilist question. Do you think that what you need is love? That is to say, maybe some kind of affection, some kind of connection with another. And then he uses the word listen. Notice the break of 3 lines with the 3 questions. In part 8 it was 4 questions. And then there's a break. Listen. And of course this listen is an invitation, right? And it takes us back to Republic Book 1. You'll remember, how can we hear if we refuse to listen? Or Christ's, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. In other words, I hope you can hear what I'm about to say, he says. And then notice again the dash. We think of our Emily Dickinson. And then he says it a second time, only now he's not talking to the individual student, but rather to America. Now, as we said in the inscriptions poems when we met, I Hear America Singing, the word America does not come up very often in Leaves of Grass. When Whitman uses it, it means something. So notice here, he's speaking now directly to America, and then he'll be inclusive in his language, daughter or son, and then he says it. And it's a remarkable line. Some have said it's one of the more remarkable lines in all of, starting from Paumanok. I have students that say it's one of the more remarkable lines in all of Leaves of Grass. It is a painful thing to love a man or woman to excess. And yet, it satisfies. It is great. In other words, he says it out loud. There isn't anything as remarkable as loving another person. That is remarkable. But anytime you concede a point, we have said in our study of the Declaration of Independence, rhetorically speaking, always seems to follow with the word but. But there is something else. And this is the heart of why I think Whitman wrote Leaves of Grass. It's not that love is, not necessary. It's to love another person, to connect with another person. That's huge. But what about the connection with everything? The all, as this poem will end. But there is something else very great. Notice the repetition of the word great. Very great. It, the antecedent to this pronoun, is fascinating because it's going to come at the very end. It makes the whole coincide. Harmony. It is the harmonics that, of course, Socrates and Plato are looking for. We could argue Aristotle also looking for. The pre-Socratics, of course, with Pythagoras and his tune theory and all of that stuff. It is that coinciding. It's that harmony. It, notice the repetition here of this, and this will make us think in passage 7 of omnis, that Latin plural of all, right? It, and then he calls it magnificent, beyond materials. There's your transcendental, to transcend from the first box to the second, as we've commented in our earlier lectures on Emerson. Beyond materials, with continuous, here's your Darwinian evolution idea, continuous hands, sweeps and provides for all. It's interesting that he uses the 2 words sweeps and provides. In other words, it's almost like a domestic kind of image. There is something even greater than singular love. It is the love of love, right? That idea of the love of love. And of course, this takes us back to all kinds of interesting theological arguments, back to our St. Augustine in Confessions. If it is true that God is love, as religious systems want to argue, then love is God, if God is love. And that is to say, it's not a question if you believe in God, it's a question if you believe in love. His argument is, I know you believe in love, but love of what? Can you transcend the love of singular to the love of all? Wow, now that is an interesting kind of question. And here we are 9 sections into starting from Paumanok, and we're beginning to realize that Whitman as philosopher is going to really try to blow our minds. He's going to challenge us in some profound ways. Well, notice his notion of extremes. Extremes, he says, are necessary. It is a painful thing to love a man or a woman, but it's even more challenging to try and love even beyond the singular, to, of course, the plural. Now this, of course, takes us in our study of, for example, our study of Whitman's, Ken Wilber's integral philosophy, to this idea that we start out in our worldview as very egocentric. What I think is right is what I think is right, to an ethnocentric position. Well, what my group or my tribe thinks is what is right, to finally a world-centric moral stance. That is to say, we begin to appreciate that there's other people who live in this world, who have differing opinions and views from us, and yet somehow all of us have to cohabitate, we have to coincide, to use the language of Whitman, right? At 2b, again, the personal question here is quite remarkable. At 3a, we can jot this one down. It does remind us a lot of what Whitman learned from Shakespeare, where you have in those soliloquies, we think of Hamlet, right? That ability to it's almost like Hamlet goes, hey, come here for a second. I got to ask you something, so what are your thoughts? Whitman has that ability to kind of create that intimate type of voice that is quite remarkable, and I want you to pay attention to it now as we go forward. Finally, at 3b, again, the question of all questions is, how are you learning through this text, connecting new information to old information in meaningful ways? You've been with us now for a while, so it's a fair question. What is it that you seek? What is it that you need? What is it that you love? Hopefully your study here of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass is challenging you to try to come up with really good answers for that. And now we'll move on to passage 10. Thank you.